Have you ever looked at a room and wondered why it felt off? Today I'm going to break down why that is and give you practical advice on how to fix it. The first and the most important factor in any part of the design is the amount of balance you get from the space. You can work with a few different ways to create balance in your space, whether it be symmetrical, asymmetrical, or even radial balance. This is going to be the most important factor of all the key design elements to make your space feel actually homey and not give you that off-putting sense when you're inside. Now there's a few different layers that you can create with balance. It can be perfectly symmetrical, it can be asymmetrical, or you can even have a radial sense of balance with that sense of symmetry of items that are placed in literally a radial sector around an item. Symmetrical balance is as simple as just that. You make sure that everything on each side of the room feels balanced because it is perfectly symmetrical. If I were to describe it, it would literally be putting a mirror image of what's on the left of what's on the right. Now these images are the perfect representation of symmetrical balance. You're looking at your living room and you will see a couch on the left, a couch on the right. Your fireplace is your central point. You have a mirror or a window on each side that help draw the eyes up, and it gives you that perfect sense of balance. Everything feels at ease, because if you don't have balance, this is going to be your first factor into your room feeling off. Sometimes completely symmetrical rooms are not always possible, and this is where asymmetrical balance plays a huge role into still creating a cohesive look. Asymmetry is when you balance off the left and the right with different elements instead of the same. For example, on the left side of the bed, if you have a huge window and this cascading light coming in, it makes it feel very light and airy. And on the right, you can balance it with a darker element to have that light and dark contrast. Another great area to use asymmetrical balance would be in a powder room. If you have one of those long vanities and the plumbing is off to the side, you have this negative space off to the left. So if you want to bring something down that's either a light or some kind of visual interest, that is the perfect way to balance out not having the same thing on the left and right hand side. If you ever are looking at a space like this and you're curious as to what balance is, stand back and squint. This is the best representation of negative and positive space so you can understand what works and what feels uncomfortable. Rhythm and repetition is going to be your best friend when it comes to making your space feel cohesive, and this is the next most important factor. Rhythm refers to the visual flow within the room, and rhythm is created by a sense of repetition of those items. Rhythm can be achieved through a number of different things, whether it be the color, the texture, an item that's repeated in the space, or even artwork that draws your eye in and it creates that sense of balance and repetition. The best way I can describe this is visualizing a constant beat. You have a steady repetition of items that are repeated in the space. The same application can be done in a living room. If you want an art piece that has a linear sense of movement that's repeated through the space, or if you have certain items that divide and zone the spaces, this creates that sense of rhythm and balance within the overall room. In simplest terms, having an item more than once in a space is going to create all that sense of rhythm and repetition that you need. Whether it be the coffee table that has the same marble as the kitchen, your eye completes that transition of that path. Same with a light fixture. If you have a similar styled globe in your living room and your kitchen island, that sense of repetition is completing those two together. Repeating textures, wallpaper, or even architectural details like bulkheads is another great way to have that sense of repetition. Today's video is sponsored by Omnilux. The Omnilux Men's Mask is a medical-grade LED light therapy device. We are now in the day of self-care. Everyone wants to make sure that they are taking care of themselves, and what better way than a light therapy device that actually allows you to take time, whether it's your busy schedule or you're taking time just for yourself. You can have this on 10 minutes while you're watching TV. You don't have to interrupt your day-to-day operations. You know what? I'm actually thinking I'm gonna have this on when I do a client meeting and surprise them. Actually, you know what? Scratch that. It might be a little bit too scary. But at the same time, you can do this anytime that you want, like shooting this video. So why red light therapy, you ask? There are so many benefits when it comes to red light therapy. For me specifically, I suffer from a lot of redness and inflammation. What's great about the Omnilux Men's Mask is that the red light therapy received from it actually reduces the amount of overall redness that you get. Like I said before, I struggled from rosacea on my cheeks, so this is a really great implementation that I've added to my self-care routine. And if you're questioning it, no, it's not painful. Red light therapy is also clinically proven to produce collagen and increase elastin in your skin, which for me is great because if I'm being honest, I'm not getting any younger, guys. This is how your daddy is going to remain Design Daddy, with the Omnilux Men's Mask. And the easiest thing about this 10-minute treatment is that you can do it 4 to 6 times a week. We're not getting any younger, guys, so this can allow you to live out that Patrick Bateman fantasy, because this mask is killer. So if you want to take your self-care steps to the next level, you can get an Omnilux Men's Mask for 10% off using code DesignDaddy using the link in the description box below. Now back to today's video. So we've discussed already how to create a sense of balance and bring a sense of repetition to the space. But where I find people get it incorrect is with the proportion and scale in a room. Proportion and scale refer to the size and the relationships of the items in the room. So for example, a terrible scale would be a huge lamp that feels so in proportion in the space and a really small sofa. And on the other hand, a huge sofa and small lights make the space feel really out of place. Proper scale and proportion are crucial to creating a space to feel comfortable and inviting. The last thing you want is to sit down on a sofa and feel like the space is so big, especially in a living room where you really want that cozy vibe. One of the greatest examples of where people get this incorrect is where you actually place your artwork on the wall. Standardly, you want the middle of that artwork to line up with your eye height. Now, that being said, there is always a different number of people that live in a space, so the average you want that installed from the floor is between 50 and 58 inches. This is the greatest representation of creating a good proportion and scale in the room, because if you have an artwork that is hung too high or too low, you don't have enough negative space on the floor or the ceiling around it for it to feel balanced on the wall. Think of how your eyes move through the space, whether it has a connection of lighting or repeating elements. You want to create a path of travel, and if you do not have the proper scale and proportion in the space, that is also going to make it very off-putting. And if you like my thirst trap photos I put up every Thursday, it is because I am also off-putting. I want you to think about grid lines that are set up on a camera, whether it be on your professional one or your iPhone at home. If you add those in and you hold it up to the space itself, it is split into thirds. This is the perfect representation of the scale and proportion that you should have in your space. If you look at landscape photography, either 2/3 of the photo is either the sky or the actual landscape itself. The same application can be done in your space. The bottom third, you want at that low level, you want to have your sofa, your coffee table, maybe some lights. At that second tier is when you start looking at artwork, your curtains, those kind of higher details that scale and proportion everything out. And then the top is obviously going to be your ceiling. Another consideration that you need to have in the space is looking at it from a 3-dimensional perspective. Those thirds are split up height-wise and width-wise. Last but not least, we need to talk about contrast and negative space. Contrast refers to the different elements in the space and how it creates visual interest. Now bear with me because I'm going to give you a breakdown on how that works. Contrast can add depth and dimension by creating different visual layers of connecting the two spaces together. For example, if you're standing in your living room and you have a pass-through into the kitchen and another pass-through on the other side, creating different color schemes in the two rooms in the distance allows for that level of contrast that gives you that beautiful sense of depth. Having depth in a space is really important to make sure that it doesn't feel off. Imagine you're sitting in a living room or even a bedroom. Every single surface is the same color. Because you don't have a contrasted difference, it falls very flat and leaves the user in the space feeling very uncomfortable. Contrast is the easiest way to give you a perspective of how these spaces define each zone. The saturation of these colors also play a huge role in how you actually interpret it in a room. This picture is a really great example of how colors further away on the color wheel create a higher sense of contrast. This is what you typically want to avoid because you want to have them along the same hue. As you can see, these colors really represent something that is pleasing to the eye versus something that is completely contrasted and is almost like that pop of color. If you have that pop of color contrast, this is where you get that visual design fatigue and allows you to really dislike the space over time because of your constant exposure to it. Now, don't get me wrong, pops of color can be done well if you coordinate the colors correctly, especially if you follow that sense of repetition and have it repeated more than once in a space. That is already your first step. And if you bring that color of saturation that's lower down on that hue, once again, that's going to allow that connection of all the colors to feel coordinated instead of just having that pop that is jarring. Now let's summarize this quickly so you understand exactly what we just talked about. We started with balance, whether it be asymmetrical or symmetrical. This is going to be your first step to a space feeling calm and inviting. Rhythm and repetition is going to allow items to be repeated in the space to allow that visual connection of looking at one and connecting to something deeper in the space. Proportion to scale is referring to the size of how things are connected into space, and especially if you're breaking it down into the rule of thirds for both width and height. Contrast and negative space is going to give you that level of depth that you need in a space for it to feel inviting and calming. With all of these combined, this is the foolproof method to make sure that your space doesn't feel off. And to fully understand how to make your space feel inviting, you should watch my other video on color trends of 2025. As always, thank you so much for watching. You can always follow me on Instagram and TikTok for all my daily tips and tricks at Mr. Phoenix Gray. And if you're ever second guessing yourself, just ask, what would Design Daddy do? Use the squinting method.